I want you guys to pass these things around. They're two of my visual aids, and they're kind of small, so I want you to see them. This one is an IQ puzzle, and I'll be demonstrating it during the speech what it's basically about. So you can open the box and see what I'm talking about later. This is another one that's kind of interesting. It's a little music box core, little thing. You can barely hear it, but if you put it on an object, it resonates more, you can hear it. This will be used later to show how art and science are kind of linked in that same way. So when we're talking about puzzles here, I'm talking specifically about NP hard puzzles. And some people in here who are taking computer science degrees might actually know what this means, but the concept basically is things like Sudoku, right? Things that are easy to check, but not easy to solve, right? A lot of problems fit this kind of category, like protein folding, and a lot of other important problems in life and science and scheduling and other things like that. And my argument is that art is another one of these problems that is very similar, so you can tackle it the very similar way. Music, painting, etc. The NP problem is really interesting because you actually get $1 million for solving it, because the question is, does P equal NP? And as you can see, most modern cryptography and the general assumption is that it does not equal, P does not equal NP, right? And I'll get into what those mean in a moment. But this question is actually one of 7 questions, and each of them take a lot of very rigorous training to even understand what the questions are asking, but they're all really interesting and really important, which is why they give you money to solve them. One of them has been solved, but he didn't take the money. Right? So what does this have to do with, right? It has to do with computing, but this isn't just math, and this isn't just art. It's a little bit of both, and it's a little bit of even more, because it has to do with the nature of physics and how much you can possibly compute or understand in a given amount of time and space. So we're going to talk about what is NP, right? This is basically puzzles that are checked quickly. So if you can see that little box passing around as you open it, you can look at it immediately and say, okay, it's solved. Every piece is in its place, it's very simple, right? And a computer can check it as quickly, right? The difference is, it's not as easy to solve it. To actually put those pieces in there, there's no actual formula to do it, right? In the similar way, there's no actual formula to do art, or factoring numbers, for example, right? They're all very similar problems. And which actually makes this the link, I think, that little kind of puzzle, right? As I see, NP hard puzzles are solved slowly, and it has a really technical definition of polynomial time versus exponential time, and you've seen exponential functions before in math where they just grow really quickly, 2 to the power of n, you add 2 to the power of 10, and it's just a huge number that computers can barely handle, if you're basically searching through a search space of possible events. Some examples include generalized tic-tac-toe. The generalization here is really important because you might be thinking, well, okay, Sudoku's not that hard, right? But we're not talking about Sudoku on a 9x9 grid. We're talking about how Sudoku scales as you increase the size of the grid to 100 by 100 grid. A computer can't solve it anymore because it just becomes infeasible. It would take trillions of years basically with our current algorithms, right? So infeasible is the word we use. Generalized Sudoku, IQ games, as I've seen there, and many more. That actually you'll see in your life probably. Even writing essays, I would say, is a similar thing. NP means non-deterministic polynomial time. It's kind of a mean-spirited way of saying, if you have an infinite amount of regular old computers, you can find the answer in a regular amount of time, right? But we don't have those amount of computers, so we can only check the answer once we have it, right? It's allegedly difficult, and I say this because it's still unproven. So the NP problem is still one of those unsolved questions in math and science. And it really has to do with how the problem scales with size and difficulty rather than just how the problem is existent in itself. So we're going to change this to polynomial times. We're going to talk about those for a sec. Polynomial is going to be almost the opposite of these, where not only can you check it really quickly, you can solve it really quickly. So if you're adding numbers, you can add numbers really quickly. And if you add really big numbers, like 1 trillion plus 1 trillion, you can add that quickly as well. So as the numbers get bigger, they don't get harder to add or multiply. And similarly, Rubik's Cube functions in a similar way, where once you understand the algorithm of a Rubik's Cube, you can basically memorize it. And from any given state, you can solve the Rubik's Cube, right? So this doesn't require some exhaustive search space kind of thing. Discovering new science is NP hard as well. So proving theorems or doing science or proving anything is going to be NP hard. Technically, we can say it's going to be co-NP, which means it's actually it's easy to prove something wrong. For example, you can put a counter-example to a proof. That would be proving it wrong, right, which is a proof. But it's interesting because we have no fast algorithms yet, perhaps, or perhaps ever, for these problems. So science is, again, one of these really difficult problems that I will link to art in a moment. Like I said earlier, complexity theorists generally believe that P does not equal NP, and such a beautiful world cannot exist. Because basically the way people have been saying it in the past is, imagine anyone who can appreciate Mozart would be Mozart if P equals NP. Or if anyone could appreciate Gauss, they would be Gauss as well. And they could develop these mathematical theorems in the same way. But like, basically, if P equals NP, that step of genius that creativity is would not be there, right? And we'd all be able to do it. So, but it's still interesting because it's still an unsolved question, right? So, but like, why is it still unsolved? It's because it itself is NP hard. If you want to prove this, you have to use a proof, and proving things is NP hard, or like I said, co-NP hard. So we don't even know if this question itself is difficult. It could be, which is kind of interesting. I just find this kind of logic really, it messes with my brain, and I think it's really fun to think about. We assume it's difficult because we can't find any answers, and because so much of the general knowledge of it means that it would be difficult. Modern cryptography requires this, so if P equals NP, a lot of our cryptography would be broken, we'd have to develop new systems. AI is being developed to fix the problems that we are discovering because of the fact that we can't find a polynomial solution to NP hard problems. And fun games are generally NP hard, like I'm starting with these puzzles. So I guess one of my main arguments here is that geniuses are artists, and artists can be geniuses as well, right? And it's because it's the same NP hard problem as science and puzzles. So a good puzzle has no trick to exploit, and art and science have no tricks either. They must be solved in similar ways using either an exhaustive search or kind of like passion, honestly, right? So do you kind of see what I mean about puzzles, where they're an example, but they're basically where art and science meet, and we create them almost as art, but they're a demonstration of science as well. So you can apply this to real life, and really many problems are going to be this problem. So try to find them and solve them. Think Sudoku, and this is the connection. Okay, finally, people generally relate to either art or science, and I'm trying to tell you that they're both essentially the same thing. They're the same problem, and if you are good at one, you should be able to be good at the other one just by using the same mindset. So, and puzzles are the demonstration of it.